Thank you, everyone, for joining our session today on post-event recovery and strategy. Our speaker today is Nick Mayo, who is a senior risk control consultant here at HAI Group, as well as a career firefighter for the city of Middletown, Connecticut. Next session, we'll discuss the key steps in post-event response and recovery, identify common mistakes and challenges following a disaster, and explore strategies to improve readiness and resilience. Nick will also discuss coordinating with emergency services and external agencies to assist your communities in the aftermath of a disaster. Please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to address these at the end of the session. The session will be recorded and sent out to all registered attendees after the event. So Nick, I will pass it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Mary. I'd just like to welcome everybody to this topic on post-event recovery and strategy. What we're trying to do in the message that I personally would like to communicate throughout this webinar is just after seeing the increase in frequency of disruptive events in housing in the public safety sectors, we wanted to put together a presentation on this post-event recovery and strategy. So when we look at the statistics, either coming from FEMA and other resources, a large majority of small to mid-sized organizations aren't reopening after a disaster. Now, granted, in the housing world, that's not really an option. So when it comes to emergency planning and talking about post-recovery strategy, what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between emergency response and business continuity planning. So throughout the presentation, I'll try to use real-world examples, either from housing providers, fire departments across the country, my experience in the fire service, along in risk management. So our goal here is operational resilience, which is the ability to protect residents, restore operations, and recover financially in this post-disaster world. So Mary gave me a brief introduction. So if I haven't met you in the past, again, my name is Nick Mayo. I am a senior risk consultant here at HAI Group. I joined HAI originally back in 2010. In 2012, I began a career in the municipal fire service. That's when I was hired as a career fireman for the city of Middletown, Connecticut. In February of 2014, I was able to come back to HAI. And since then, I've been working both careers in tandem with each other. My territory with HAI Group includes New England states, such as New England, New Jersey, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut. My background is primarily in the fire service. Went to the University of New Haven and did my undergraduate work in fire science administration and my graduate coursework in public administration. So when I'm not in the office for HAI, I am a battalion chief with the city of Middletown. Being able to do both careers definitely is a blessing for me, and I'm trying to bridge the gap between the fire service and risk management and tying them together to increase safety for all of your housing authority sites. So if you do have questions, either from a risk management perspective or a fire service perspective, please by all means ask. And that is the background on me. So now we'll get into the presentation. So our objectives for today, I like to think of this as a before, during, and after style presentation. So first, we want to understand the response actions after any disruptive event for emergency services and housing authorities. We also want to learn effective communication strategies. And when we communicate, it is with emergency responders on scene, along with tenants, staff, and the members of your housing authority. Integrating continuity strategies to maintain operations. This is when we're putting our plans into effect. So having them written beforehand, but also integrating them into your response operations, that will be a part of this discussion. Rounding it out, ensuring regulatory and insurance compliance, We always want to make sure that, things are staying in check when in regards to regulatory and insurance standards. So therefore, as we go through the presentation today, we will start with the before, talk about the during the emergency, and conclude the discussion with the aftermath. So to put it into perspective, if you were as a housing provider experience an emergency on site, we need to manage resident relocation, the documentation, and the reoccupancy of our properties, all while maintaining normal operations. So that is what this discussion is going to be based off of. And without further ado, we will get into the conversation. So to start us off, this is a slide about the regulatory and standards alignment. So we all know that there are different types of codes and standards that, as a housing authority and as a housing provider, we need to meet. So whether that's international building codes, fire codes, NFPA standards, or other standards coming from OSHA, HUD, and FEMA, we all know that these eventually may intersect post-event. HUD estimates that over 75% of federally assisted housing sits in areas prone to natural disasters. Therefore, this planning part is an essential piece to manage a disaster when it happens on site. Why compliance matters post-event? It doesn't just end when the fire is out or when the emergency stops. It continues during the recovery and rebuilding. Fire code compliance and building inspections can be referenced post-event. So documentation is key because we do need to reference these things if we are rebuilding a property or a building. How do codes integrate with continuity planning? There's a lot of different models out there when it comes to writing either your business continuity plans and your emergency operations plan. So NFPA 1600 is the standard on disaster and emergency management and business continuity. OSHA 1910 talks about worker safety and cleanup. HUD put out a notice in 2012. It is the standard 48, emergency and disaster preparedness for public housing. When it comes to FEMA, the National Incident Management Systems Framework integrates command structures into your emergency planning. Therefore, there's a lot of resources out there. We want to make sure that before, during, and after a disaster, all these standards and codes align so that therefore we can move forward in this post-disaster environment. Like all things, and this is even, our backbone and foundation as risk consultants for HAI Group, everything starts with a risk assessment. Even in the fire service, we use the 5-step risk management model, similar to what we would use in the insurance world. But first, what we want to do is identify our threats. So we're going to determine potential events that could disrupt operations. From there, we would assess probability and impact. So when we assess the probability and impact, this is the evaluation of how likely each threat and the potential severity of its consequences is. After we've looked at our threats through the identification and assessment process, we want to prioritize them based off risk. We're going to focus on threats that pose the highest risk to our operations. Again, this is another area that different tools are available, either through HAI or online through FEMA. One tool that is available through FEMA is their threat and hazard identification and risk assessment tool. What that does is it helps you dissect information and input your threats and hazards that can affect your community into a document. If those hazards occurred, what the tool tries to do is direct you in a direction for what impact would they have. Based on the impact, what capabilities should your community have? It starts pointing you in a direction when it comes to your emergency planning. And this risk assessment cycle is a continuous cycle. So as we identify more threats and start to assess them, we will always try to prioritize based on risk. And again, the ones that pose the highest risk to our operations are ones that we're going to dedicate our attention to. Through that risk assessment process, we can look at the risk landscape for housing providers. Personally, after being in this profession on the risk management side for close to 15 years now, this risk landscape is changing. Vice versa, it is changing for us in emergency services as well. Things that we haven't had exposure to in the past, are emergencies that are coming up and becoming commonplace. So that risk landscape is changing. So when we look at the risk landscape for housing, I like to put them into 5 different categories, whether it's fires, security threats, natural disasters, man-made incidents, and public health emergencies. So if we dissect this even more, we're going off statistical data, even with fires, that on average, over 100,000 non-residential building fires occur annually in the United States. When it comes to security threats, I mean, if you look at the media, we look at the news, and we look at the threats of the world that we live in today, security threats are becoming, more commonplace, especially in housing environments. Natural disasters, over $165 billion in disaster losses. I mean, this is over a period of just a single year in 2023. Cyber incidents are occurring more frequently, and even in the public health sector. I mean, we all went through COVID, seeing that pandemic, it just changed the landscape of how we're preparing for, these disasters to happen. So even dissecting it even more, in the fires category, it's not just the fire itself, but what if we have a failure in the fire protection equipment? In the security category, it's not just the security incident that happens on site or a security breach, let's say due to, faulty locks on a door, but what if our camera systems go down? In the natural disasters category, areas that aren't prone to hurricanes, floods and wildfires are seeing these types of emergencies. So if it's something that you haven't seen in the past, I would look at your business continuity emergency operations plans and start assessing those risks based off of the areas in which you live, but also areas that are in close proximity to you. If other housing authorities across the country experience something that you've never had on site, maybe talk to them and to see what their exposure was, to see if their plans were in place. Because unfortunately, areas that maybe had a low frequency event, never happened before, they are experiencing that. And if you don't have plans in place, then you're, for lack of a better term, you're doing it live in regards to your emergency response and activating their plans. So when it comes to the emergency scene, so we talked a little bit about before when it comes to your contingency planning. Now is the during part of this discussion. Your emergency scene can and will be a hectic place. One, school of thought and recommendation is always to stay clear and you don't interfere with first responders. When it comes to dispatch protocols for fire, PD, emergency management, or even emergency medical services, those dispatch protocols are going to be preset. So depending on the emergency that the dispatch center takes in, they will send appropriate resources, to your property. So if it's a security incident, it will involve police department response, and obviously fire and EMS responses will dictate based off the information that they get into the dispatch center. It is easier said than done as far as ensuring residents and the public are staying clear of the emergency scene. It is a scene that is hectic. There's a lot of things going on, staying clear and not interfering with first responders. It's just a great practice. I believe, and in my opinion, a housing provider's role is accountability and information when it comes to the emergency scene, not actually controlling it itself. But when it comes to accountability and communication, these are the cornerstones to success on an emergency scene. One bullet point on the slide here is communication on scene with first responders. I would advise designating a single point of contact for your agency to talk to whoever's in charge. So, if the fire department response, there would be an incident commander. Even on a police response, there would be an officer in charge. So when the scene has calmed down, and when you start to see resources either demobilize or leave the scene, there will be a time and an opportunity to communicate with the first responders. If something is pressing on scene as far as relocation of your residents or a need to relocate your residents, obviously you want to find that officer in charge or incident commander because they have resources that they can call as far as either relocating people, or let's say it's in the winter months, keeping people warm potentially in a public transport bus or community shelter. So on scene, it is hectic. It is organized chaos. So staying clear and not interfering is imperative. But if there is critical information that you need to pass along to the first responders, please do not hesitate to do that and make sure you're doing it in a safe way. Immediate safety measures on scene. So there's 4 different bullet points here when it comes to immediate safety measures on scene. So life safety is always our first consideration when it comes to the discussion about evacuation versus shelter in place for your residents. That is going to be based off of your prior planning and your contingency plans for your residents. Different types of construction as far as the buildings will determine if a resident is to evacuate or shelter in place. To expand upon that, what I mean, let's say in a fire, if there's a high-rise structure that's fire resistant construction, most of the times the fire department will recommend for residents to shelter in place unless it's their unit or their floor that's affected. If it's a 2.5-story townhouse style wood frame building, obviously in a fire situation, a resident would want to evacuate. When it comes to security threats, instructions for the residents to either shelter in place or evacuate need to be in place, even for natural disasters and wind events. I would definitely recommend that a conversation is had with your local first responders. Invite them on site, invite them to tour a property, invite them to walk through a building and get their recommendation. What should residents do if a fire happens, or if a security threat happens, or if a natural disaster, such as a hurricane, is going to cross paths with the property? So that conversation definitely needs to happen in your emergency planning, but I would get the recommendations from your local first responders because they're the ones that are going to be managing the incident, and they're the ones that are going to give the best recommendations. Other immediate safety measures for during an emergency is accounting for staff and residents. And again, this is easier said than done, especially in the housing environment. We don't know what residents are home. We don't know what residents have gone and stayed with either friends or family. Staff accountability is an easier piece to do because you should know as property managers and as an organization who's in today and who's not. But when it comes to the residents, having some type of log or tracking document to know the names of all the residents on your property, that should be easily accessible when it comes to the aftermath of an emergency. Securing the site when it comes to barricades and hazard zones or utility shutoffs, that is going to be coordinated with the local building and health department. So if a site needs to be secured, if we do need to put up barricades, or if there are specific hazard zones on site, do that in conjunction with emergency management on scene they're the ones that are going to be able to determine, if a site needs to be avoided or if access to the site is going to be granted. Coordinating with fire, police, and emergency management. There's a time and a place at an emergency scene for this. It's when the risks have been mitigated. But if you do have questions about, how long the site is going to be shut down or what to do or where to relocate your residents, that coordination is going to be with the emergency services personnel that are on scene. I think this is one of the most important slides during this presentation, because during any emergency or post-event recovery, communication is going to be your most powerful tool for maintaining trust, controlling rumors, and even ensuring a coordinated action on your part. Providing calm, clear, and factual updates is one of the most important things to control confusion and even anxiety, whether it's anxiety from your staff or from your residents. So again, this would be for both inside and outside your organization. Always stick to verified facts, acknowledge what's unknown, and explain next steps. There are different tools out there when it comes to communication. So when it comes to mass notification, either to your residents or to staff, there are tools out there and different types of applications such as Everbridge, Code Red. There's a bunch of different vendors out there. So find what works for you and even find what your local community uses. I would point you in the direction of your emergency management director for a communication tool that they use in the community, because then you can, communicate in tandem with emergency management. If they have a platform that they use, then maybe you can push it out to your local communities as well. When it comes to the communication for your internal and external stakeholders, obviously our internal stakeholders are going to be our staff, our board, leadership within the organization. If we have pre-established group chats, radio channels, or internal dashboards for situational updates, this is when we want to use them. When it comes to external messaging, so this would be our residents, our vendors, or even potentially the media. We always want to focus on safety instructions, whether it comes to status of utilities and timelines for reentry or repair. We always want to maintain, factual information. And examples from what other housing authorities have done in the past is providing live updates on a specified hour-by-hour basis. Because what this does is this reduces misinformation. One thing that I can suggest, and this would be stealing a page from the book of the fire service and emergency services, is to designate someone as a public information officer or a designated spokesperson. That consistency will build credibility. And if that message is coming from a single source, in this post-disaster and recovery, that just helps, relay messages in a timely fashion, but in a consistent fashion. So if that individual for your housing authority has not been designated yet, then that would be something to build into your continuity planning. If that individual hasn't received training before on being a PIO or being a designated spokesperson, obtaining training for them is something that you can do within their professional development. So I would train multiple people just in case that one person is not available. But the more people we have trained on relaying communication, how to communicate with the media, it's going to be, better for your organization. So again, when it comes to communication protocols, clear, factual updates, and sticking to the facts is going to be imperative for your organization, and that's an integral part in your continuity planning. So this slide reinforces how crucial early documentation and organized record keeping are to ensuring full insurance recovery, after the incident. We always want to initiate your claim with your insurance carrier as soon as practical after the incident. Inventorying damaged property with photos and videos, tracking costs for lodging, cleanup, and temporary systems, and even coordinating with adjusters for inspections. These 4 bullet points are going to be your foundation, when it comes to initiating the claims process. Maintaining receipts for all your response-related expenses. We want to keep a record of everything that we're spending and all the information that we're collecting. So whether it's witness statements, whether it's statements from residents or an accident report from the property manager, we want to keep all of these things on file. Because what we're going to do is coordinate with our insurance carrier and the adjusters, because obviously the adjusters are going to be on site. They're the eyes and ears for your insurance carrier. So we do want to make sure that we're keeping all that information on file. And even a best practice could be maintaining a master insurance contact sheet, using cloud-based systems, but also keeping, a paper trail as a backup source of information would be a best practice for you. I like to look at this as in every major loss that you have, the documentation is a part of your currency, where without it, your recovery slows, it could delay the insurance process. So always maintain your documentation, have a plan for it, have a plan on how you're going to save and track everything as you're going, and it will definitely help you in your day-to-day operations. So when it comes to restoration and continuity strategies, the first bullet point here, for actual considerations, there's 2 different schools of thought where we want to look at the services offered for our contractors. In tandem with that, we are going to be figuring out the building hazards, whether they're structural, electrical, or environmental. When it comes to the restoration process, having either a memorandum of understanding or a contract in place, you want to activate resources immediately. Having that relationship and also identifying with that contractor, if we have an emergency and we need cleanup services, or if we have an emergency and we need to board up our sites, seeing where you land on their priority list should be a part of that conversation. So we always want to have these discussions prior to. When it comes to the continuity side, whether it's alternate work sites, remote work options, or data backup and IT disaster recovery, we want to make sure that we have a plan beforehand. Cross-staff training. I like to give recommendations for training 1 level above your current role and responsibility, but also know 1 level below you. We know in a post disaster response, staff may not be available or staff may become overworked. So we need to know multiple roles. So part of a professional development plan that is going to integrate into your continuity planning is going to be cross-training for your staff. It's just an important part of recovery where everybody is going to step up and everybody's going to want to help out. So we want to make sure that everybody knows different roles and responsibilities within your organization. So this slide is about financial and operational resilience. Your organizations can sustain operations and recover financially following a disruption disaster through planned reserves, vendor continuity contracts, and also having different types of insurance strategies. When it comes to your emergency reserves, this will provide liquidity when normal revenue streams are interrupted. So your goal here as an organization is to prevent delays in critical repairs and continuity operations. A best practice for this, and my recommendation would be to talk to your board of directors, talk to the people that you report to, in figuring out what an acceptable dollar amount and month of reserve operating expenses is acceptable for your organization. So whether it's 3 to 6 months of operating expenses or a specific percentage of your annual operating budget, having some type of emergency reserves for when a disaster strikes is an important part of emergency response planning. When it comes to vendor continuity contracts, again, I kind of prefaced it on the slide prior, but pre-negotiated contracts and service level agreements with essential vendors guarantee support during disruptions. We always want to make sure that we have priority access for restoration contractors, our IT services, and our utility companies. There are a lot of disaster restoration companies out there today, depending on where you live. So what I would do is ask other agencies who they use, ask if they've had positive or negative experiences, and obviously bring in those contractors to interview them yourself. You want to know that you are a priority if you need them. So you want to have that relationship, prior to the emergency itself happening. When it comes to business interruption insurance, this is going to be the insurance that covers your lost income and operating expenses during the period of your restoration following a covered loss. So what we want to do is, if you need further information on what your coverage is or what the coverage triggers are, whether it's reaching out to your account representative here at HAI, we want to make sure that your coverages in this area and figure out your coverage areas. So well-defined coverage and prearranged vendor agreements are extremely important, and that is going to be a cornerstone of your financial and operational resilience. This slide is going to highlight legal regulatory documentation steps that must be followed before, during, and after a disaster. There is always going to be permits and inspections before reentry. So why does this matter is, premature entry without clearance can violate safety codes. So we always want to make sure we're keeping, whether it's residents or staff or even contractors, safe. So when it comes to considerations for reentry, we want to be cleared by the building department, the health department, before we make reentry into a building. Addressing environmental hazards, whether it's a fire, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's water damage. We know that buildings may have asbestos, mold, and water damage. There are parameters, when it comes to personal protective equipment. Again, we want to keep everybody safe. Consulting with your legal counsel on your liability and maintaining your records for your compliance and insurance. These legal consultations help your organization manage your liability exposures. And when it comes to your documentation, that is your legal defense and the foundation for, the claims process and the insurance process. So maintaining accurate inspection reports, permit approvals, test results, and even invoices. These are all things that you want to have on file and you want to have readily accessible. The next two slides have to do with supporting residents along with tenant engagement. These are the residents on our properties. We want to make sure that if we need to assist in temporary housing, we do that. Connecting to social services, whether it's FEMA, Red Cross, or a local organization, we want to be able to provide emergency housing options. Addressing the needs of elderly and disabled populations is a factor that is going to be a part of our emergency planning. And one thing that we always want to do is be able to provide updates on restoration timeline. So if we need to assist our residents to temporary housing, having the resources on hand or predetermined contracts to be able to do that is going to be part of our continuity planning. One thing that I think is an important part of this discussion is transparent information when it comes to tenant engagement. So if we do have properties where our residents are, speak a language other than English, we want to make sure that we are providing information to them in the language in which they speak. So it goes to the outreach program, disabled non-English speaking groups. If we need to provide ADA compliant communication, that is something that we will do. So if even in an instance where we need to conduct door-to-door outreach, if technology access is limited, this is definitely a part of that tenant engagement piece. And we want to make sure that we're providing transparent communication, because what we want to do is build trust and ensure that no group is left behind during the recovery process. One important aspect that I feel is often overlooked is our workforce and staff support. So there is a human factor to this post-disaster response. So even if it's staff fatigue, personal trauma, and even burnout, we want to have resources on site for our staff. So whether it's wellness resources such as EAP or counseling, and even fatigue management, our staff is going to be working nonstop, but we need to keep in consideration that eventually they will need to take a break. Eventually they will need to go home and manage, their own homes and their own family. As I said in an earlier slide, cross-training and redundancy, when it comes to your key roles, is an essential part for emergency planning. Even in your succession planning, if you identify leadership gaps, it's just an area of planning when it comes to your workforce. If you need either an employee to step up into a role that they're not normally in, or step down into another role that can't be filled because someone is able to come to work, that cross-training is going to be a key part of your success. Throughout this process, encouraging wellness debriefs and rotational staffing during long recovery operations, these are all things that are going to play into the success of the rebuilding of your properties in this post-disaster environment. So if we have an emergency happen on site, so whether it's a natural disaster, a fire, a security threat, this is something that we always do, even in emergency services, especially in the fire services, some type of after-action review. So conducting a post-incident debrief with staffs and vendors that talks to the people that were there, along with the people that responded. Included in that discussion is going to be areas of improvement for fire and emergency services. Invite them to the table, ask them questions in regards to your response, and even if there's areas that you could have improved. Lessons learned need to be integrated into your business continuity plans. And the only way that this is going to get better is with annual training and exercises. So when it comes to a structured after-action review, the questions that you are going to want to ask are what went well, what didn't, and what should we change? Involving either internal and external stakeholders, and even scheduling some type of tabletop exercise to test the updates that you're making in your planning. That is going to, ensure continued success for your emergency operations planning. So an after-action review is such an important part to improve your operations and your response. And I thoroughly recommend that everybody does some type of review when it comes to you had an emergency on site. When it comes to emergency management moving forward, again, regular drills and safety inspections are an integral part to moving forward. So regular either evacuation or shelter-in-place drills, safety inspections for your properties. One thing that I would do, invite your fire department and your police to do a pre-plan and walkthrough of your building, your property. Inviting them on site to do some type of pre-plan. Again, it gets them on site to see that the buildings that they're going to be responding to in an emergency. We always want to make sure that all fire protection equipment, whether it's alarms, extinguishers, and sprinklers, are up to code. And we're going to train our staff and residents on emergency procedures moving forward. Tabletop drills with leadership team are an integral part to moving forward. But that preparedness piece is a continuous process. So we always want to make sure that we're reviewing our plans, and what that's going to do is going to reduce on-scene confusion during an actual emergency. So that's a continuous part of preparedness planning, is always improving our process. So before we round out the presentation and to briefly discuss some case studies and lessons learned before we get to our key takeaway slides, 3 different case studies, whether it was a hurricane and its impact on housing, an apartment fire with sprinkler and fire protection failure, or even a cyber attack. These are things that have happened in housing where we were able to take away key lessons learned. So when it came to the hurricane response, 2021 Hurricane Ida, obviously catastrophic flooding was seen across New Jersey. There was widespread property loss and tenant displacement. Multiple housing authorities were affected. Thousands of units were affected. Local Office of Emergency Management and FEMA and HUD deployed mobile command units, quickly into the field, and the housing authorities affected were able to activate their emergency operations plans. Some key takeaways, from this hurricane and flooding, for the positives was they had vendors on site within 24 hours, and remote work from home options were activated. But again, with an emergency response, those were limited. Challenges that they saw in the field were a lack of redundant power, being a lack of emergency generators, challenges in documentation, and when it came to getting vendors on site, although they responded quickly, some of the contracts were not pre-negotiated, therefore the costs encumbered were higher. So some lessons learned and key takeaways were establishing your MOUs with other local PHAs. Does a neighboring housing authority have resources that they could share? Do they have extra generators? Do they have extra logistical support potentially in the aftermath of an emergency? And also another lesson, a key takeaway for those local housing authorities were to conduct annual assessments and to create daily briefings when it came to communication with not only staff but residents. For another case study was an apartment fire with a sprinkler and fire protection failure. This happened in Connecticut. It was a 100-unit complex in which a basement fire occurred. The sprinklers failed to activate due to frozen pipes. So this was in the winter months. So this fire damaged 12 apartments, and obviously, smoke damage was throughout the building. Residents were displaced, and the cost of the loss was in the millions. Now, from an emergency response perspective, there was a proactive fire department response, but since there were no sprinklers in the building, this caused more fire damage rather than water damage from the sprinkler being activated. So key takeaways: the housing authority was able to activate their reunification plan for the displaced residents. They had a predetermined plan with the American Red Cross, and they were able to establish temporary offices for their staff for the building that was affected. Some challenges that they encountered and lessons learned. Obviously, we want to keep our fire protection equipment inspection schedule according to NFPA 25 inspection standards, and that failure to maintain that sprinkler system, especially in the winter months, which created the frozen pipes, was obviously a challenge for them. So in climates where you do experience winter weather, we need to make sure that fire protection equipment is maintained, but also not in areas where it could potentially freeze and be an issue when it comes to a fire department response. To briefly talk about cyber attack on a resident portal, this was a member in New England. This was a targeting attack on their tenant portal. So the portal was down for a period of 16 days. Thousands of residents were unable to submit their rent electronically. So a positive was the housing authority was able to shift to manual rent collection. When it came to a continuity positive, the backup data from offsite servers was restored to 90% within 7 days after the cyber attack. Lessons learned is they wanted to perform more cybersecurity assessments, and they began to bring in outside vendors in order to do those assessments. They wanted to review their cyber coverage and confirm, their limits with the insurance carrier, and integrate cyber response into their business continuity plans. So looking at these case studies, there's always going to be lessons learned. These are things that we try to do in our risk department, is look at, these low frequency but high severity events. Can we get information and resources out to our members? And can we learn, with the organizations as they go through the claims process? So key takeaways from today's presentation include that all disasters require a core response. This is safety, communication, and documentation. Business continuity planning extends focus from response to resilience, and property managers are the link between residents, leadership, and partners. So when it comes to the recovery process post-disaster, this isn't a static process. It evolves as risks change. As housing providers, we need to adapt continuously, investing in both resilience and foresight when it comes to our emergency planning. So to summarize some of the core principles that we talked about today, the compliance and documentation piece, this is going to protect the recovery process. And when it comes to the communication side, this always is going to build trust and stability in this post-disaster world. So one thing that I would offer as a key takeaway, and it's not on the slide, is I would encourage anybody here to identify one area of improvement that you may want to look at in regards to continuity planning, and just look at your current plans to see if there are any gaps, so that when you can move forward when it comes to your emergency planning. So that's the information that I had. I don't know if Mary was able to field any questions as they came across, but again, I just want to thank everybody for the time today, and hopefully you were able to take away a few points of discussion that you can follow up on in your own organization where you work.
Okay, so we are at the end of our time for this session, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing your expertise on this topic and giving us really some practical guidance on navigating the aftermath of a disaster. We appreciate it. Our next session, which is also the last session of the day, is at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and it will focus on responding to cybersecurity incidents. So thank you again for attending, and we'll see everyone in a few minutes.